Good morning, 9 o'clock now at Super Talk 99.7. I'm Joan Jones with your top stories. Well, here's the latest from the National Hurricane Center. Hurricane Milton still has winds of 85 miles an hour. It is centered 75 miles off of Florida's Atlantic coast. Along the Gulf Coast, all storm surge warnings have now expired, but people on the ground say the conditions are pretty rough there. Damaging winds will continue for a few more hours in east, central, and northeastern Florida. There's also still the danger of storm surge along the east coast of Florida, Georgia, and South Carolina this morning. Well, they're feeling the ripple effects at Florida's airports now, too.
Issues, those flight cancellations, 2,200 flights already canceled this morning. They've started canceling flights tomorrow, so almost 500 flights have been canceled tomorrow, and that's on top of the nearly 2,000 flights they canceled yesterday. These flight cancellations are starting to pile up on each other, and we're going to feel that all across the country, not just here in Florida.
That's ABC's Eva Pilgrim. In East Tennessee, Governor Bill Lee announcing 3 more counties have been approved for FEMA's public assistance program. Claiborne, Granger, and Sullivan counties now joining that list. And the Department of Health confirming another weather-related death, bringing the Tennessee total to 17 in the wake of Hurricane Helene. The number of people still unaccounted for is down to 6. One heavily damaged business in North Carolina's flooding was Baxter International, which makes about 60% of the nation's supply of IV drugs used by hospitals. Vanderbilt tells Channel 4 they are able to treat patients as needed for now.
It's going to be a challenge over the next few months to make it through because the options for the FDA are ask the other manufacturers to increase their production, which may or may not be possible. Look internationally at other supply chains and see if those supply chains could be introduced.
Baxter says it is making progress on bringing its North Carolina facility back online. And tennis legend Rafael Nadal has announced his retirement this morning. He is 38 years old, a 22-time Grand Slam champion. He'll play his final match next month in the Davis Cup. Market Numbers Report brought to you by Beacon Capital Management, online at beaconcm.com. Consumer inflation prices showed prices were still on the rise as inflation is cooling, not quite as fast as the Fed was hoping. Dow Jones Industrials down 91 points, NASDAQ falling 57, and the S&P 500 index is minus 13. That's the latest news. Traffic and weather are next. I'm Joan Jones, WTN News.
The guaranteed offer is the easiest way to sell your home. It's really simple. We bring you an all-cash offer. You close in as little as 21 days. No home inspections, no lock boxes, no open houses. Go to markspain.com to get a guaranteed offer and start packing.
Good morning. I'm Cameron Smith, filling in for Chris Hand on the Chris Hand Show. Several of you guys were very concerned that Chris was vanishing. He is not. He is going to come back.
I thought it was interesting yesterday. You kept saying, this is the Chris Hand Show. And everybody's like, he's fired. He's gone.
No, he's not.
He's gone.
He's still employed. He is here. I sure hope he comes back. I really.
It's going to be a real awkward conversation on Monday.
It is. But he's going to come back, folks. He will be here. And I am privileged to have the opportunity to join you guys for 3 hours today and tomorrow. Same deal tomorrow. He's still going to come back. So yeah. I know there was some concern there, but let's put that concern to bed.
I was like, honestly, I think he's probably going to be at the wellness event tomorrow night as well. So if you really want to make sure that he's good, go to the event tomorrow and you'll see him.
It could be a plant, though, at the event.
That's fair.
It's pretty common for Cumulus to invest in body doubles.
That's fair.
Except for never. I mean, it's okay, folks. But that's good news. I'm glad that y'all are such fans of Chris and the other host on the show that you notice when they're not here. That's certainly awesome. We're going to have fun this Thursday. This is a thankful Thursday because the big headline is that Florida dodged a bullet with Milton.
Yeah.
DeSantis came out and said that. Big deal. Still a ton of work to do. I think last count, somewhere between 2 and 3 million Floridians without power. I don't want to forget our friends in East Tennessee and North Carolina. They are still in a bad way. I talked to one of my friends this morning who's getting some ATVs together to go bring supplies and aid to a church at the foot of a mountain where the residents up the mountain, roads have broken down, everything like that, so they can't get there. So,
holy wow.
This is the volunteer state for a reason, and I've been really impressed at how people have said, let's do it. Let's figure it out, for whether it's Home Depot, Walmart, individual people, the redneck with a chainsaw.
Yeah.
That guy, I love that guy. If I'm in an emergency, I want that guy who was like, oh, we got this. Well,
yeah.
sir, it's spun off tornadoes. It's incredibly unsafe. What are you doing? I'm going to go cut down some trees.
Taking care of these trees with my here pickup and my electric chainsaw.
I mean, absolutely. And also, that person is my dad. Because my dad now tells people, he's retired, and he tells people, I trim trees.
Nice.
And they're like, do you do this professionally? No, for fun.
It's just a hobby.
Yeah, he's like, I want to use a chainsaw, basically.
I mean,
in my retirement, that's what I want to do. So, I mean, around his small farm, he has pristine trees. I mean, they are golf course level manicured.
Nice.
Because he's like, well, I'm going to trim up these trees, and then we're going to burn it. We'll have the grandkids over for a big bonfire. And
nice.
That's what he does. And when we say the after Christmas bonfire is epic,
I bet.
He goes to the nearby neighborhood and is like, you going to use that tree? I'm like, Dad, it's on the road. You can take it.
So it's all yours.
And so he piles up Christmas trees. And if you have never piled up Christmas trees and set them on fire, you are really missing out.
It's a sight to behold for sure.
It is just boom.
It gets big if you're not ready for it. It's something else.
Yes, and obviously the grandkids love that. We do issue disclaimers that if you have any synthetic fabrics and you just prepare for them to be ruined with
maybe step back a little bit.
The ash coming down. My boys always, ever since they were little, anywhere there's a big bonfire, they will make separate, smaller fires that belong to them. And they're like, this is my fire.
They maintain it themselves.
Why are you making another fire next to the big fire? Well, for reasons. And that's...
'cause this one's mine.
That's how I know that I have boys. You're hearing Mason on the boards. He's going to take care of us today. Joan on news, and she's going to make sure that we're informed and we know what's happening. Like I said, the big headline, the big excitement is Florida's had it rough the last couple weeks. And this one, not good, but it could have been a lot worse. And
Absolutely.
So, you know, I what's amazing, if I won president of the United States, I would appoint the departing Florida governor as head of FEMA.
Yeah.
I mean, come on.
Yeah.
DeSantis's approach has been like, I'm the chef in town. I've got this. It's great if FEMA shows up, but I'm the quarterback here.
Yeah.
And that's really what you want. Is it's the job of the governor to keep the people safe.
Yeah, you want to
take care of them.
You want to make sure that they take care of their home. And I don't know. He looks at it as like one big happy family. And if you're struggling, he's over there to help you out. And it's been a very cool thing to see with his response on everything like that.
And I really like DeSantis before. I mean, I wasn't like all in for DeSantis, but this has really impressed me that regardless of what happens in November, I don't think that his political ship has sailed, as it were.
I agree.
I think he's going to have other opportunities, and this is just great. There are people who are good governors and good leaders who aren't the best politician.
Yeah.
I think DeSantis falls in that. I don't think he wants to stand on a debate stage and smile and talk indefinitely. I could tell that in the press conference I was listening to this morning. He's like, give me a break. It's the morning after. I can't tell you about the valuation in terms of damage.
Yeah, it's like it just happened. Give me a second.
But a lot of politicians would be like, well, I appreciate your question and spin and fluff. And he's like, really?
Yeah.
And that to me says he's more concerned about what's going on in the people of Florida than he is about, his own image.
Yeah, he's direct on the issue at hand. And that's really important. And you don't see that a lot today.
Yeah. And I really appreciate that. I love, Jason said, Ron is no Mitt Romney. He is not. He is not, Jason. That is absolutely true. Members Nutrition Super Text line, come join the conversation today, 615-737-9986. Same number for the phone, 615-737-9986. The lines are open to talk about what you guys want to talk about. But it seemed as if the rundown, I got a lot of feedback from the rundown on the Senate. I'll briefly go over that again. I'm looking at the House races, and I want to talk a little bit about the main event because I think this is looking really, really good for Trump. A couple other pleasantries I like to get out of the way. I always tell you guys every show I start where I'm coming from so you guys know that there's nothing, no funny business happening. I think it matters a lot to everybody that has a microphone or a column or anything like that to tell you what's going on. My day job's over at Thanks, where they help businesses grow with gratitude. It's coffee for the week, Starbucks, right? Or, a ride share for the holidays, just spreading gratitude in business. It's a privilege for me to be able to work with those crews. I'm on the editorial board of the Tennessean. I'm a columnist over there. I write for AL.com. Basically, I write all along the 65 corridor. It's very exciting. At D. Cameron Smith on Twitter. And I'm just, through sheer force of will, going to make hashtag TN Politics a thing. Like, if we can just talk about this. Because what I've noticed in Tennessee is there's not there's a couple of grassroots conservative groups that are kind of wild, but there's not really hey, this is the channel where all the political talk is for the right of center folks. Obviously, you have Super Talk. You can have a conversation on this radio station, and y'all really do. But in terms of on an ongoing regular basis, hashtag TN Politics could work for us. X is a great place. A lot of you folks are on X. I love that. So check out at D. Cameron Smith on Twitter, hashtag TN Politics. It's also fall break. I know at my house that means it's getting crazy, kind of weird even, because the boys are all around. Yesterday, Mom left. She went to get her hair done and hang out with some of her lady friends in the evening, which meant I had a man night all to myself with the boys. So we broke out the pressure washer, as one does, and pressure washed the grill. We pressure washed some things I'm pretty sure we probably shouldn't have. But, man, we were having a lot of fun. We had eye protection. It was great. But, I just want all the parents out there where it's fall break, the kids are home, enjoy them while you got them. They're going back next week. So have a little fun. We sure have. And then I'll tell you, the Nolensville Triple B Stars have got Brentwood. There's high drama next week on Wednesday night, 7:00, Crockett Park. You should be there because we have some expats from the Stars who are now Blaze players, and so it's going to be a fun showdown. And the Triple B Blaze is undefeated. They are the real deal this year, so it should be fun in the youth football land. All right, switching to politics. I looked at where we were at this point in the election in the past cycles. Thankfully, we have consistent characters, so we kind of know what's going on. I looked at October 10th with the general election polling. Where was Clinton at this point? Where was Biden at this point? And where is Harris right now? And I think the results are going to surprise you guys. We got to take a break. I'm going to tell you what they are when we come back. I'm Cameron Smith. You're listening to The Chris Hand Show on Super Talk 99.7.
Did you know you're overpaying for your health and wellness products?
With over 20 company-owned brands offering its members vitamins, supplements, wellness, and skincare products, you're able to save up to 70% off retail.
Members Nutrition can't change your life, but we can change the way you live.
Up ahead here on Super Talk 99.7, Milton did its damage, but Governor Ron DeSantis says it really could have been worse. And the one statistic that pollsters call a game changer for the GOP this time around. Got those stories coming up for you at 9:30 on Super Talk 99.7 WTN.
Welcome back to the Chris Ann Show. I'm Cameron Smith. I appreciate you guys waiting to hear where we are at this point in the race, because I think this may be the biggest indicator of the way things are going to go. So several of y'all on the Super Talk text line, 615-737-9986, have pointed out that over time that the polls, some of y'all don't trust them at all. Some of you look at them for direction, but don't think they're specifically accurate. I fall into that category. The polls are useful. They're not determinative. They're not always exactly on point. But in this case, we've got, where were they in October, on October 10th in 2016 and 2020? The challengers. Clinton was at 5.8% up. She had a 5.8% lead on Trump. We know the story. She ended up losing. Biden at this point, he was up 10 points, 10.1 to be exact. Where's Harris? 2.5. The reason that I think this is good news for Trump is you've got a 1 win, 1 loss, and then where Harris is, it's a lot closer to that Clinton one, and the Clinton one was close. When they poll national polling, now they try to adjust for this so that they can capture it, but this feels more like popular vote type thing and less electoral college. If someone is up in that sort of general election polling, but if it were between 5 and 10 points, I'd be concerned for Trump. Where it is right now, at 2.5% that she's up in the national polling, I think he's in good shape. If you look at this from just a strategic standpoint, which I'm a policy and politics nerd, so I do. Doc says, Cameron, the polls by the state media is nothing more than propaganda. Well, Doc, I hear you. But a lot of the polls that I look at are aggregate polls. So I don't look at one poll. I look at Real Clear Politics or 538. And they aggregate polling data together. And that is incredibly useful in terms of getting the direction. And the other one, and I'll get to this one in a minute, is the betting odds. People lie all the time on the telephone to polling. Folks very rarely lie with their money. And I actually think betting markets are an even better way to look at, hey, where are we and what's going on? And I'll talk about that in just a second. But this, to me, the polling and the strategy suggest that Trump's in a good situation. And that's not just, and you guys know me, I call balls and strikes when it comes to Trump. I think Harris being out there, you see all of this stuff about her just not answering questions. She doesn't answer them well. She doesn't even pivot well. Well, the strategy was Joy hides in the basement. That's what she needed to do, to say, hey, we're excited. We're joyful. We are basically stealing Reagan's happy warrior. We're a lot of the Trump populist policies we like anyway, and we got this. No, I will not answer any questions. That was the strategy that she needed. And will there be a significant October surprise? I think that might have been these hurricanes. If these had been worse, it would have taken the media cycle completely out of it. Since they're not that bad, I think you're going to see more and more positive spin from the legacy media that loves Harris. They've already reimagined her entire persona such that she has a net favorability rating. It's net positive. And that comes from a candidate that was so far underwater that you couldn't see her eyeballs. I mean, she was unfavorably perceived. Media's reimagined. I think that has some utility, but it's not translating into movement in the polling data. It's just not. So, yes, I see 0882. Remember the big wave that was a little pink ripple? Yeah, I'm not saying that this is a wave here. I'm simply saying from what I am seeing in terms of where these elections were previously with the same opponent, right? Trump was the consistency here. Harris is not up nearly as much as Clinton or Biden. So that bodes well. The strategy changed too, where she's doing more interviews. She's talking to more people, and it's not going well, and they keep doing it. Okay? That, to me, is a good indicator that they're seeing something that says, we've got to change something. We've got to get momentum going. We've got to make this work. And they don't have it. They don't have it. Meanwhile, what's Trump doing? He had a bad debate versus Harris. He just did. You would think, hey, if I'm behind, I need to get back on that stage and do a better job the next time around. Harris has tried to call him out into debates a couple of times, and he's refused. And you can look at that and say, well, it went poorly. And of course, Democrats will spin it as it went poorly, so he's afraid to do it again. I don't think that's the case. I think he's looking at the polling, he's looking at his internals and saying, you know what? I think I'm in pretty good shape. I don't need to risk it. And this is the way a front runner behaves. That's the reason that so many incumbents don't do debates. If they think they've got the race in the bag, they don't show up for a debate because they end up hurting themselves. And I think that I'm not saying he's got it in the bag. I'm saying he's got a good chance. Here's what I'm seeing that gives me even more confidence that this is going well. The betting odds data. So I was over at Real Clear Politics, or I should say Real Clear Polling, and Betfair, Betson, BWin, PointsBet, Polymarket, Smarkets, everybody's got the odds are in favor of Trump. Now, it's not massive, but literally all of the markets right now have him up. And he wasn't. So I think that's what's going to change here is over the last couple of weeks, it was flipped the other way. Now it's this way, and we're seeing the strategy match up. 7716 says, if you believe in the betting market so much, talk to college football fans from last week. Well, before we talk to those college football fans, we've got to talk to Joan, and we've got to get the news. I'm Cameron Smith. This is the Chris Hand Show.
Hey, it's 9:33 now, and I'm Joan Jones with your top stories. We're at 64 degrees now, heading up to 81. The forecast on the way. Well, it wasn't the worst case scenario, but Hurricane Milton did significant damage, slamming into Florida as a Cat 3 storm last night. Governor Ron DeSantis this morning, it appears prayers have been answered.
A lot of places in Pinellas County, they had negative storm surge because it sucked the water out of the bay. So in terms of all that, where you'd see the entire Tampa Bay area underwater, that did not happen.
Still 3 million customers without power, and floodwaters expected to rise in the coming days. Well, a near collision of 2 airplanes at BNA last month is being blamed on air traffic controllers who cleared both planes for the same runway. The National Transportation Safety Board releasing its findings yesterday. It said an Alaska Airlines jet was cleared for takeoff at the same time a Southwest plane was cleared to cross the runway. The Alaska Airlines pilot aborted the takeoff, applied the brakes. The heat built up from the rapid stop caused all 4 tires of the Alaska Airlines plane to blow. Digging into the polling numbers, the Wall Street Journal has found that for the first time in 3 decades, more Americans are calling themselves Republicans than Democrats. One GOP pollster who works for NBC calls it an unrecognized game changer for 2024. Inflation cooling more slowly than expected. The Consumer Price Index rising 2.4% last month, and that was higher than expected. Core prices rose 3.3%, also more than expected. Well, that report is leading markets lower now. The Dow Jones Industrials minus 95, NASDAQ down 59, and the S&P 500 index is down 15 points. That's the latest news. Weather's next. I'm Joan Jones, WTN News.
Hey, what's up, guys? It's Matt Murphy in the middle of downtown Franklin, Tennessee. We've talked so much about Savory Spice. I thought, why not show you the place? So let's go on in and see what's popping at Savory Spice. As I've always said, you will smell the spices even before you walk in. I can smell them right here in the doorway. Come on in and let's introduce you to the one and only Holly, who is the owner and proprietor of Savory Spice. Say hey, Holly.
Hello, everyone.
Now, enough about Holly. Let's talk about spicy and easy products like the incredible taco soup, which, as I said, you put this in a crock pot, you put all the ingredients that it tells you to buy right there, you put the spices in, and it's so easy. So if you don't know what you're doing around the kitchen, it's a perfect way to find your way around the kitchen, as is the Mediterranean dill risotto. Now, for the holidays, pumpkin pie spice. What doesn't it have, Holly?
Pumpkin.
Doesn't have any pumpkin in it. That's a fun fact for all of you kids out there. Now, if you stop by Savory Spice, either in the Franklin location or at L&L Market, you can get yourself a sample of the dill dip, which is my absolute favorite. Just tell them Matt Murphy sent you to Savory Spice with purchase now. So come by Franklin or L&L Market in Nashville and come see Holly and the entire crew at Savory Spice.
Welcome back. I'm not Chris Hand. I am Cameron Smith. And on the Super Talk text line, you're still concerned that Chris may be vanishing. He's just on vacation. It's going to be fine. It's going to be fine. But we've got about an hour and a half left to go. And I was reading a GAO report during the break because I'm a nerd like that. And I had to put it down because it was this year's report. It was released in February, so it's a little bit dated. But it's on the nation's fiscal health. We may get to that a little later, but it is. Let me put it this way. It's kind of depressing to read through how much of a failure Congress and the president has been at doing anything that approximates reasonable fiscal policy. Just garbage. There was a great question, 3970 on the Members Nutrition Super Text line said, are you confident in a fair election? But it's kind of interesting. I've got a column coming out, I believe it's going to come out on the 13th at the Tennessean, and I address this because I think this is a very important question to answer. If you were telling me right now that the election will not be a fair election, I don't see how you can honestly say that because it hasn't happened yet. On the other hand, if you're telling me that this will definitely be a fair election, I don't know if you're honest either because it hasn't happened yet. Here's what I can tell you about the election, and I think it's important that we have this conversation, is that neither Harris nor Trump, nor frankly any other politician on the ballot has any excuses this go round. And here's what I mean by that. COVID was weird, and we all know it. It was a very strange time. I was actually talking to one of my colleagues at Thanks the other day about having a kid during quarantine here in Tennessee and having relatives have to kind of do like a drive-by to say hi to the new baby. It was a weird time, and there were a lot of things going on. And so that reality, we're not in a pandemic right now, and I don't see one happening before we get to the election. I know Marjorie Taylor Greene thinks somebody's controlling the weather, but that's insane. So we should just put that out there. But there's a couple other things. In the intervening years, legislators across the country have said, we're going to address this. We're going to make sure our elections have integrity to them. Whether that's voter ID laws, whether it's changing different kinds of voting practices. Every state knew COVID was strange, and every state has had an opportunity to address that from their elected majorities. So that's another thing. We also, I don't know if you guys know this, but there was a spending measure at the end of 2022 that contained the Electoral Count Reform and Presidential Transition Improvement Act. It just basically clarifies that the vice president has an administrative function in certifying the election. It clarifies who gets to submit to Congress slates of electors and increases the threshold for objections by members of Congress. And so that there's no stone unturned when it comes to this election cycle. We've addressed a lot of the lingering questions. They're already clarified. Now, what you're going to say to me, which is a reasonable response, is, hey, Cameron, that's great, but what about the vote itself? What about, vote watching? What about legal challenges? To which I'd say, yeah, we should have poll watchers. Legal challenges are a part of the process. And it's not a secret. We know the states where the election is going to be close: Pennsylvania, Arizona, Wisconsin, Michigan, Georgia. We know this. So launching challenges and having them teed up. And when I worked in congressional leadership as the executive director of the House Republican Policy Committee, I got to go to some of the fun meetings where we're off campus talking about politics versus just purely legislative matters. And this is one of the things in 2016 that 2016 and 2020, I don't think that we were really prepared. 2016, Trump was new. 2020, their campaign just did not have the level of preparation, which I get because, again, COVID. But we absolutely have the ability to launch those challenges now. So I'd have lawyers teed up in those battleground states and say, this smells funny. Okay, that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. Democrats, they're trying to say, well, there's something wrong with challenging the results. There's nothing wrong with doing that. You need to do it in good faith. And if it's not in good faith, if you don't actually believe there's any misconduct, then those lawyers should be sanctioned for filing frivolous lawsuits. But we have a process here. So, yeah, I do think that this can be a free and fair election. But the idea of predetermining that and saying this is the way it's going to turn out and we must abide by the results and we can't challenge any. No, don't say that. You shouldn't say that because people can cheat in elections. They can do stuff that's not right, and you need to have the ability to sue and get that worked out. I don't like this game of just saying, well, if I don't like the results, then somebody cheated. I think that's ridiculous and insane, and we shouldn't do that. But, yeah, there are a number of reasons to believe that this will be a more secure election. And so if you're already gearing up to say, hey, they're cheating, are you going to gear up to say they're cheating if Trump wins? And if you aren't, then I would suggest that you might be a little biased there, but that's just me. Okay. Looking at the Senate, this is something that I can boil down very quickly. Justice is going to win in West Virginia. That's almost certainly he's going to pick that seat up that was held by Joe Manchin. And so you're going to get a pickup there. That brings the Senate to 50-50. If Tester loses in Montana, then we're there. That Republicans have the Senate. I think when you start looking at Ohio and sort of down in some of the closer races, we might get one or two, maybe. But I can't say in looking at where those races are that there's a slam dunk in any of them. In fact, there are some that look, kind of out of reach. I think Nevada increasingly is looking that way against Rosen over Brown and Lake, who's like Gallego. The representative is looking like he's going to beat Kerry Lake. Again, the Lake seat was a easy one that Republicans could have said, we're going to try somebody new here. And they didn't, and I don't think she's a very good candidate. But I do think that state's one where Republicans can be competitive. So, would that be some cushion that we'd like to have? Absolutely. Do I think we'll get it? Probably not. If we do and she wins, Republicans have crushed it. It's going to be really, really exciting. I'll do a little bit of a House rundown on the other side of the break because I think that one's actually, the path is a little murkier, and I want to go into some of those races with you guys. This is the Chris Hand Show. I'm Cameron Smith, and you're listening to Super Talk 99.7.
Not the worst case scenario, what Florida Governor Ron DeSantis has to say about Hurricane Milton. Also, police issue a warrant for a Honduran man wanted in the death of a young girl riding a scooter with her mom. Those stories coming up at 10 o'clock on Super Talk 99.7 WTN.
This just reminds me of Iggy Azalea. But I'm Cameron Smith. This is the Chris Hand Show.
Do you know who this is? It's Eminem.
Oh.
Yeah. It's Godzilla from one of his newer tracks.
Oh, okay.
Newer albums, yeah.
That's cool. Chris is cooler than me, though. I'm very old. I have a son who shaves, so all the cool things that my boys bring home with them and tell me, and the oldest one, who I call the Beast, he was like, comes in and says, "Sup, cuh," and I'm like, what?
Huh?
How? What are you saying? What's up, cuh? Like cousin? I'm like, I'm your dad.
Yeah, I was like, that doesn't
Didn't
correlate
make
at
any
all.
Sense. You are crazy. Hey, on the Members Nutrition Super Text line, Tim agrees with me. He said, I actually thought it was Iggy. I'm so fancy.
Oh, that's fair. Yeah.
I knew it wasn't, but I could see it going there.
Absolutely. Yeah. 100%. Yeah.
And as a very old dad, the fact that I'm like, oh, yeah, obviously, I'm so fancy.
Of course.
I know that one. I've bumped that one in my car. Yeah, of course. Everything's fine, folks. So we should probably talk about this controlling the weather thing. I mean, why not? Let's rip the Band-Aid off.
Just a little bit.
So cloud seeding has happened. Like, that's a thing. We know it is. It improves. This has been around since the 40s. It improves the ability of clouds to make rain or snow. That's basically what it does. And there's other countries around the world that have similar programs. We can do that sort of thing. So in that sense, okay, cloud seeding does change this. But they actually, between 1962 and 1983, their idea was we could modify hurricanes using cloud seeding, and then they kind of abandoned it because it just didn't really matter to the hurricane, because a hurricane produces an absolutely insane amount of energy. So to be able to reverse it or dissipate it requires a commensurate amount of energy, and cloud seeding can do it. Now, some of y'all have pointed to lasers and said, well, these lasers are really what it is. Well, yeah, if we could stop hurricanes and tornadoes and really rough natural events, I think we would. The idea that we could control them with any precision is bonkers. Like that idea of geoengineering, well, we want to change things and we can do that by a large scale manipulation. Okay, there's plenty of people that talk about that in theory and saying we should try this, or we should think about this. But the idea that even that, if we could do it, could somehow create a hurricane or stop a hurricane, that's just crazy. That's not a thing right now. And I'm not saying that to be like cruel or dismissive. I'm simply saying, come on, folks. Like, when something is a little wild, we need to admit it's a little wild. But we do need to talk about free and fair elections, a House breakdown, and other things in the next hour. I'm Cameron Smith. You're listening to The Chris Hand Show on Super Talk 99.7.
Well, good morning. It's 10:01, and I'm Joan Jones with your top stories. We're looking at 68 degrees, headed to 81 in the sunshine later. We've got the forecast coming up. Hurricane Milton slammed into Florida as a Category 3 storm. There is flooding, there is strong winds, and there were deadly tornadoes. Governor Ron DeSantis.
The storm was significant, but thankfully this was not the worst case scenario.
Most notable, the storm surge didn't live up to the hype, thank goodness. Millions of power outages, though, but the linemen are well rested. They're tackling those outages now. There were at least 4 deaths reported in St. Lucie County, where a tornado swept through a mobile home park. And Governor DeSantis is warning to watch it today.
Please be cautious of hazards. We have post-storm fatalities almost every storm, and a lot of these fatalities are avoidable.
Now, the cleanup from Hurricane Helene is still in full swing. Officials announcing the death toll in East Tennessee rose to 17 yesterday after another victim's body was recovered. 6 people are still unaccounted for. Warrants have been issued for the driver of a car that struck a mom and daughter riding a scooter on Nolensville Pike last weekend, killing the 10-year-old girl, Emily Sanchez Ramirez. Police are looking for 39-year-old Walter Zuniga, who is a native of Honduras. He's also known as Deneri Valera. Police are confirming that he was behind the wheel of a red 4-door Nissan that crashed head-on into that scooter in the bike lane. The mother, Laura Ramirez Gonzalez, 28 years old, remains hospitalized in critical condition. A major court case could decide what happens to more than 3.5 million undocumented migrants brought to the U.S. as children.
Those dreamers are still in the U.S. because President Obama created the DACA program, delayed action for childhood arrivals. For years, Republicans, including President Trump's Justice Department, tried and failed to end that protection. A judge eventually agreed with Mr. Trump, and now the case is before the New Orleans Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals. If the judges rule those children can stay, the case could end in the Supreme Court.
That's ABC's Andy Field. New data shows that consumer prices aren't dropping as quickly as the Fed expected. Consumer prices rose again last month, 2.4%. That was more than expected. But if you were hoping your Social Security checks would reflect the still higher prices, you're out of luck. This year's cost of living increase is expected to be 2.5%, or about $48 a month. That's the latest news. Weather's still to come. I'm Joan Jones, WTN News.
The guaranteed offer is the easiest way to sell your home. It's really simple. We bring you an all-cash offer. You close in as little as 21 days. No home inspections, no lock boxes, no open houses. Go to markspain.com to get a guaranteed offer and start packing.
So,
Welcome back to the Chris Hand Show. I'm Cameron Smith, filling in today and tomorrow. Chris will be back. And you can tell him about your ideas to address hurricanes. Luciano on the Members Nutrition Super Text line, 615-737-9986. How about a drone with 50 pounds of dynamite in the eye of a hurricane and 10 pounds in a tornado? I don't think that would be a great idea. I don't think it would actually do anything, but on the off chance you dropped it on somebody and then blew it up, that could be very bad. And I'm not sitting here as some kind of meteorologist. I'm simply saying that there have been efforts to try to address rain, particularly with droughts and stuff like that. There's always people that are looking for theoretical ways to improve condensation in rain clouds, lasers being part of them. But the idea that the government has a game plan and then they're controlling the weather for sinister political purposes, that's just not true. It's not true. And 9058 says, I knew they blew a nuke in a hurricane. Can you imagine if you set off a nuclear warhead near Tampa? And it just does not strike me as a good idea. Roy in Liberty has some thoughts on the hurricane. Roy, what you got?
Well, good morning to you. First of all, wanted to explain, on a hurricane developing, the mass air, how many miles of water that is under that hurricane would be like taking all the swimming pools in Tennessee, and then you'd have to multiply them times 1,000.
Right.
And that's what you're dealing with. So a stick of dynamite would make an effort in a swimming pool, but not a million swimming pools.
Right.
Now, what happened on Helene is something that I had never seen, but if you take the path of Helene, the geographical path, it was like a trough coming up. When a hurricane develops, it's like a balloon filled with water. But that trough of land is moving quickly, was reducing the size of that balloon. And a balloon of water, all it takes is just one prick and it blows.
Right.
When it hit North Carolina, those mountain structures touched the surface, because a hurricane has a skin, it has a surface. When those mountain tips hit that surface, that's why you had 30 inches of rain, which is unheard of.
Right.
And that is why all the flooding and whatnot happened, was there was that much energy. But our energy is coming from the warmth of the water, and a tropical storm is just a storm like we have, a wind blowing, but it's like a battery that's able to absorb. But as it absorbs up, the transfer of energy pulls the water up into the air. As it pulls the water up into the air, that's where you get the circular motion, because there's that energy there. And that energy develops as long as it's being fed that warmth, it is going to grow.
Right.
And when it hits the land, that is the balloon being touched. The outer stretches of that hurricane is being touched, hopefully dissipating water before it is concentrated so much that you're washing out, which, it doesn't. That's why we have the damage. But what happened with Helene will be studied here for the next 100 years, because it was a fact of geography, a fact of the air currents, a fact of a high pressure area to the north of us, and everything was just in the wrong spot.
Yeah. Well, Roy, how do you, let me ask this, that's a great analysis. Or do you have a background in weather?
Actually, I have a background in troubleshooting. I come from engineering, where when you had a problem, you come and got me. I'm just an old man sitting on a sawmill, sitting on the front porch anymore. I am absolutely nobody.
Well, Roy, we really appreciate it. Thank you for the call. Roy's on it. And I'm not saying that Sally on the Members Nutrition Super Text line made a really, really good point, consistent with what Roy was saying. The amount of energy it takes to create that water balloon Roy was talking about is just astronomical. And so the ability to control a force that significant it's certainly beyond the pale of Congress or Joe Biden. And Sally made the point that she watched the 2-minute video on X that folks are talking about, that Marjorie Taylor Greene was mentioning, and then the physicist was talking about an experiment and that it's not used in the real world right now. And I think there's going to be a lot of people, and there have been a lot of people talking about experimental technologies to address some of these weather realities. I mean, years ago, we didn't know that we could actually harvest waves for electricity, but now we do. And I think that's what we're talking about here. And Ray said something that I want to address because this is like everything right now. Cameron, you can't say for a fact that they aren't manipulating the weather. You don't know that. But on the same hand, I don't know that they are either. But anything that the government does and says they don't do would not surprise me one bit. Guys, when we're in this posture where either you have direct firsthand knowledge that something is not the case or not, and so you cannot say anything definitively, so anyone's inference is as good as anyone else's, that's insane. I cannot say definitively that my car that has rumbling has a mechanical issue. There could be a demon in it. But I trust that a mechanic with training can tell me something about that. So when meteorologists tell me stuff about the weather, namely that it would be almost impossible to control something that large with that much power, then I trust their judgment. And so I don't like this game that we play of, hey, you can't know that the government's not controlling X, Y, or Z. Therefore, it's just as likely that they are. That's not true. And I've spent a lot of time with politicians in Congress, with executive branch agency folks. These guys can't even control a budget. You think they can control the weather? And yeah, there are some bureaucrats that want to do nefarious things. They can't defy physics. So just throwing that out there for your consideration. You don't have to take my word for it, but the idea that nobody can know anything except that which they know firsthand is lunacy. It's not a good idea to take that. Expertise does need to matter. And I think that's listening to some experts. It doesn't have to be always the government. I don't like this idea that only government bureaucrats are the experts, but there are plenty of people that understand how weather works, and they understand that it's kind of crazy to say that somebody in government is controlling it. One of y'all asked a very good question that I do want to get back to. Why did I say that Kari Lake is a weak candidate? First, she already lost in a statewide race not too long ago. And that to me, right out of the gate, is a big deal. If you just lost, what changed so that you wouldn't just lose again? The same reason I didn't like the recycling of Mitt Romney is why I don't love the recycling here. I don't like the recycling of Donald Trump either. That's just me. I think we had better candidates. I still do. Looking at Ron DeSantis handling the storm, he looks like one of them. So, but here's the other reason. In the primary, Lake was against the Pinal County Sheriff Mark Lamb, okay? He spent no money on TV and got 39% of the primary vote. Some of y'all have said the problem is her short hair. I don't think that's it. But the fact that a candidate runs in the primary against her, doesn't spend any money on TV, and gets 39% of the vote tells me that that candidate has some real weaknesses. And my concern is that this could have been this is an imminently winnable seat. I could actually see Trump winning Arizona and Lake losing the Senate seat. So that to me, I don't think it's there. This is a recycling problem in Arizona that is not going to be helpful. And she runs like a candidate, to just put it mildly, she runs like a candidate who could win in Alabama or Tennessee. Arizona's a swing state. It's different. And I know that's hard to imagine here because Republicans in Tennessee can be as conservative as you want them to be. They can be bomb throwers if they want. They can say whatever they want. They can, and Lake did this in her gubernatorial race, basically saying, we don't want the McCain Republicans. Guess what? In Arizona, you need them. You don't need them here in Tennessee. You absolutely need those folks in Arizona. And so that's a big problem because those voters decide in Arizona, and a lot of those McCain voter types in Arizona are not gonna play ball with Lake. So that's why I think that she's a weak candidate. I think by contrast, Larry Hogan, former governor of Maryland, is a great Republican candidate in Maryland. He'd be a terrible candidate in Tennessee. And this is what I want to sort of put out there for your consideration is you got to run different Republicans in different races. Swing state races, competitive general elections are different races. Larry Hogan is running in a deep blue Maryland. So the fact that he's pro-choice, supports abortion, and he doesn't embrace Trump at all is literally the only way he could have a chance at winning. If Blackburn or Haggerty ran their type of campaign in Maryland, they would lose. They'd get 20, 30% of the vote and it'd be over. And so that to me is something that Republicans have got to wake up to, is that in these swing states, you may have a primary juggernaut, somebody who everybody's like, they're so great. We love them. But you can't get the voters you need to vote to win in the general. That's already happened once with Lake. It's, in my estimation, going to happen again because Gallagher's up in the polls by double digits. And I really think until we sort of address the fundraising issue too, it is absolutely wild. I was pulling this figure yesterday, and I get it, and I'll issue the disclaimer again that cash does not always win elections. 100% true. Totally agree with you. However, the discrepancy in resources is insane. Looking here's this is FEC data. So this isn't from some campaign. It's from the Federal Election Commission. Presidential this cycle, Joe Biden raised $690.3 million. Harris raised $678.9. Trump this cycle has raised $313.0. So I'll add those up and look at this. Democrats, $1.38 billion, and Republican candidates, Trump and the also-rans, $537 billion. That to me that matters, guys. I don't know another way to say it. It really, really matters when there's that much of a fundraising differential. And I don't know why that is. I'd love to get your theories on why it is. I know that you can say Soros, but, you know, the Kochs, the folks on the right have money too. Is it that they're willing to put their money where their mouth is and we're not? Like, what? Help me understand this, because these numbers are really, I just looked at them this week and it is just shocking. We got to take a break. When we come back, we'll talk about it a little bit more. I'm Cameron Smith. This is the Chris Hand Show, and you're listening to Super Talk 99.7.
Up ahead in the news, Milton is a memory now, but it's left behind a trail of Florida destruction. Also, Nashville police issue arrest warrants, in the scooter death of a 10-year-old girl and the critical injuries of her mom. Those stories at 10:30 on Super Talk 99.7 WTN.
Welcome back to the Chris Hand Show. I'm Cameron Smith. We've been rocking and rolling, and over on the Members Nutrition Super Text line, 615-737-9986, some great questions, and I would like to try to address some of these. 7464 says, I don't understand why they need to raise money to run. Can't they just pay it themselves, tell us their policies and whatnot? Well, you just heard an ad for Senator Marsha Blackburn. She's up for election, and it costs money to get on the airwaves. So, yes, some very wealthy candidates do self-fund. They put their money into the race so that they have a good chance of winning. The candidate Hoved in Wisconsin has done that. I believe McCormick in Pennsylvania has done some of that. He's a hedge fund CEO. But the question is, do you really want only super rich people to be able to run for office? If you do, then say, hey, just pay for it without fundraising. If you don't, then, hey, those candidates are going to have to fundraise. And it takes a lot to run a national campaign. It takes a lot to run a state campaign. And even in a congressional race, they've got to raise a lot of money. In the congressional district that Andy Ogles currently represents, every candidate who wanted to be competitive had to raise at least $1 million or somewhere thereabouts. I mean, you've got to raise a ton of money every cycle just to go buy the airtime, just to go do the social media ads, to hold events. I mean, to do all kinds of stuff. It is very, very expensive. So that's the reason why. But what the dollars do in this case is they buy you a bigger megaphone to get out your policy perspectives and to say what you want to say. And I think I misspoke because it wasn't the Republican candidates for president didn't raise $500 billion. It was $536.7 million to the Democrats, $1.384 billion with a B. So before it's all over, I wouldn't be surprised if Democrats raise 3 times what Republicans raised this cycle. And just so you know, I mean, Trump's sitting there at $313 million. Ramaswamy had $66 million. Robert F. Kennedy, $60 million. Nikki Haley, $57 million. But even folks, Doug Burgum, $18 million. That should give you an idea about how expensive some of this stuff is. And Keith said, are you calling a Senate race a national campaign? No, I'm talking about presidential and Senate. But it's a statewide campaign, and those are very expensive. The Senates are. When you look at Senate candidates, Democrats have raised $630 million to $372 million for Republicans. House candidates, $737 million for Republicans, $728 million for Democrats. So there it's pretty close. Pretty close. As far as the House candidates that have raised the most, they're pretty, you could guess. Hakeem Jeffries, $17.7 million. Speaker Johnson, $13 million. Let's see. Jim Jordan, $10.7 million. Scalise, $10.6 million. AOC, $8.98 million. And that gives you an idea. I mean, that's just money matters, and it is there. I'm not saying it's something that you have to do. But man, if you don't, it gets ugly. And a couple of you have asked, well, after the election, can we just sweep that money in to help pay off the national debt? That's an interesting idea, but you'd have to change the law. And my guess is it wouldn't go over too well because these campaigns they're federally regulated, but they're private entities. Like they have money that comes in that the candidate did the work. So to say all your money gets swept away, I don't know if either the donors or the candidates would go along with that. It'd be a little hard for me to imagine Congress saying, yeah, sure, great idea. It's an idea, though. Usually what happens, there was a law passed years ago called the McCain-Feingold Act, and that stopped retiring members from being able to take that money and put it in their pockets because that could have happened prior to McCain-Feingold. Now, you can donate it to a nonprofit. A lot of people donate it to centers. There are a number of issues on what you can do with it, and we'll talk about those. William, I see you there. Wanted to talk about campaign funds. We got to take a break. This is the Chris Hand Show on Super Talk 99.7.
Good morning. It's 10:30 now, and I'm Joan Jones with your top stories. Hurricane Milton moving into the Atlantic now after bringing ferocious winds, floods, and deadly tornadoes to Florida, but sparing the Tampa area from dangerous storm surge. Police Chief John Cosby in Bradenton Beach says that the city needs to restore power, water, and sewer before people there can return.
We're seeing a lot of wind damage. Roofs have been compromised. We've had some structures that were compromised. They blew off the stilts.
But the devastating storm surge didn't materialize. Back here at home, TEMA has attributed one more death to the Hurricane Helene death toll, bringing it to the total in Tennessee to 17 now. 6 people remain missing. Governor Mike Lee visiting the donation center at Bristol Motor Speedway yesterday.
We are the volunteers here in this state, and the volunteer spirit is alive and well. And you can see it here. But as I said, there's an American spirit here when we have people from multiple states.
And a big Hurricane Helene relief donation made by Taylor Swift yesterday to the tune of $5 million. Metro Nashville police are trying to track down a Honduran man wanted for the killing of a 10-year-old girl who had been riding on a scooter with her mother on Nolensville Pike when they were hit head-on in the bike lane. They're looking for Walter Zuniga, who also goes by the name Deneri Varela. Police have obtained 9 warrants for his arrest. The girl's mother is still in critical condition. Well, stocks are in the negative territory this morning after a report that showed prices are still stubbornly high. Dow Jones Industrial is down 112. The NASDAQ is down 30 points now, and S&P 500 index minus 12. That's the latest news. Weather still to come. I'm Joan Jones, WTN News.
Yes. The Chris Hand Show. I'm Cameron Smith, filling in today and tomorrow. Chris is alive and well on vacation. The conspiracy theories about Chris's whereabouts are quite interesting. All I can say is big if true. Quite big if true. We're talking about some of the campaign information, and several of y'all have different ideas. 8987 on the Members Nutrition Super Text line says federal elections should be government funded. Each candidate receives the same amount. Anything above that, the candidate should spend what they want out of their own money. If they accept additional funding, federal sentence of 5+ years in prison, eliminate a lot of the pay for play. I don't know about that. I think that it's a good idea to have transparency on where the money comes from when it comes to elections. I like that. But the idea that the taxpayer should fund candidate elections, no, I want that. I really don't like that. I want that candidates to have to hustle. I want them to have to go ask people for money. They're going to be asking powerful people for their vote to build coalitions. I definitely want them to have to interact with those folks. And I've been to a ton of these fundraiser things. I was at one last week here in Nashville. And it's tough to say, hey, you know what? I just need you to take your hard-earned dollars and put them behind a candidate. Unless you really, really believe in that candidate, it's tough. And, you know, you've got PACs and all those things, but there are limits on what individuals can contribute per election cycle. So you basically get an opportunity at the primary level, at the runoff if there is one, and in the general. The FEC, I'll say, has done a very good job of breaking down this data so we can kind of know. This is actually really interesting, and I wanted to share it with you guys because, one other question that I wanted to answer. If you want to know what's going to be on the ballot in Tennessee, you can go to the Secretary of State's website, and they have a list of all the candidates and things like that you can go see. So several of you have asked, where can I figure out what's on the ballot so that I can talk with my kids? That's where, Secretary of State's website. So I was really curious to see this. I looked at President Trump's contributions received this cycle and where the money comes from. You guys have any guesses? What do y'all think number one is? I know what I would have guessed, but what do you think number one is in terms of where the donations came from to the Trump campaign? Where do you think it is? Come on, tell me on the Members Nutrition Super Text line, 615-737-9986. What's the state that has given the most to Trump's campaign? I will tell you Tennessee is not in the top 10. Elon Musk. First of all, the state of Musk is not a thing, but no, it's not Elon Musk. The campaign, because oddly, from an individual standpoint, Elon Musk can only contribute the same as has the max that everybody else does. He can fund a super PAC with unlimited dollars and run stuff. To the best of my knowledge, I don't think he's done that. What's the state? What do you think it is? I know I would have guessed Texas. I would have said Texas is, I know there's a lot of oil money, a lot of folks in Texas who would support Trump. Texas is number 3. And the amount of money Trump's raised out of Texas is $29,398,395. John says small donations. I think that could be part of it. I'm just asking states. I got a New York, a California, an Illinois, Florida. All those are good guesses. California's number 2. Florida's number 4. Number 1 is Virginia. Y'all could keep guessing for hours. It's Virginia. The Trump campaign has raised $39.3 million and these are individual contributions within the state of Virginia. And you can actually browse them and see who actually has donated. But He's raised the most from individual contributions from Virginia. Next is California at $30.6 million. Texas, Florida, New York, Georgia, Pennsylvania, Arizona, Ohio, North Carolina. The volunteer state is 11th with about $7 million, a little less than $7 million. Wild. We'll look at Joe Biden in a second. But William's been very, very patient. William, what did you want to talk about with campaign funds?
Campaign funds. Question, are there laws in place to protect Trump, in this case, to ensure that ABC, CBS, and any other liberal network would charge him the same per 30-second blip, whether it's prime time or not prime time, as he charges the Harris campaign?
I don't know the answer to that. I don't think there is but typically it would be a market rate that's published in the market. I do know that the rates go up. I do know it gets more expensive closer to the campaign because there's competition for those spots. In terms of where I thought you were going to go with it was airtime, and President Reagan abolished the fairness doctrine, which basically said that candidates have to have equal campaign airtime to portray their policy positions. I don't love that. I don't think that's a good idea, but that's where I think Harris gets the biggest advantage is from cable news and legacy media that have propped her up and helped her to be a more substantive candidate than she really is.
I just don't think we can assume that they're playing fair.
Oh, I think you should assume that they're not playing fair. I think you should assume the opposite, that there's no love lost for Trump on MSNBC, CNN, New York Times, a bunch of these places. Washington Post, they're very clear about their perspectives, and they are very clear about, well, Harris is basically a moderate candidate. That's absolutely false. She is a California liberal. The idea that she is somehow the reasonable Democrat, she's far more radical than Joe Biden, and they're reimagining her. And yeah, I think that's a fair take.
Okay, thank you. I just wonder if there should be laws in the future to protect him against that kind of bias.
All right. Well, I appreciate it, William. Cameron. Thank you. So I hear what he's saying, and I think William makes an interesting point. I just think as principled conservatives, we've got to be careful of saying, hey, if these news stations, if these entities are, in fact, private entities, they can charge what they want. Now, should we treat that as a campaign donation? Maybe. I mean, maybe that's a way we could address it. So this would not be a surprise. Who do you think the number one, these are individual contributions grouped by state. What do you think the number one state is for Joe Biden? I'm sure you guys can probably guess this one. This seems pretty intuitive to me. Anybody? Okay. I got to wait for a second. You got to build up the suspense. I think I'll go with number 11. It's Colorado. 5437 says Ukraine. No, not a state, surprisingly. California, $95.3 million out of California, $43.0 million out of New York, $24 million out of Massachusetts, $23 million out of Washington State, $22.7 out of Florida, Texas, 22. Let me look for a second. I want to see. That's just wild to me. I mean, they're pulling in big amounts from all over the place. I know that y'all are shocked that Tennessee, for Joe Biden, $4.7 million. It's number 23. So I just find this pretty insane that we're seeing such a discrepancy. And I don't think this is, the government doing anything or anything subversive. I just think the Democrats have a knack for fundraising. and I think that they're doing a lot of it. I know that there's a lot of super PACs, and so y'all need to keep that in mind, that there are super PACs that are working on to promote Republicans that aren't captured by the FEC data right here. So that's just candidates. It's just individuals. But I do think that the spending and the trends and things like that help us get a sense of how these races are going, how they're going to shape out. I gave y'all the rundown for it. 9111 said they may have overall money, but it's probably coming from fewer people. I don't think so. They have Act Blue. We have WinRed. These are the fundraising platforms they have. And there's a lot from small dollar folks all the way around. Like, that's kind of the new thing is there's a lot of aggregated campaign donations. And if you look at the maximum donations and you divide those figures of the individual donations, it's a lot of people. It's a lot of people investing in politics. I want to pivot just a little bit. 6719. Y'all aren't going to let me pivot. I need to address these. It's nothing but elites funding the Democrats. That's just not true. It's not true. There are a lot of rank and file Americans donating $10, $50, $100 to Democrats. So don't kid yourself. I mean, we can talk about the elites all we want, and they certainly are funding, but there's a lot of small dollar donations for Democrats. True, that really started with Obama, and they've been doing that. Now, Trump has made inroads. Act Blue came first as sort of a massive fundraising engine. Then WinRed kind of picked up and figured it out. WinRed and Act Blue make it very easy for candidates to get up and running with fundraising. It gives them access to things where normally they would have had to start their own website and get their own payment processor and have it all. Now it's just, boom, this is easy. It's a turnkey fundraising apparatus. And I think that's changed the game. And the truth is, there are a lot of people who are doing these small dollar things and changing the scope of some of these races. And, it's good on the Democrats and Republicans of figuring out how to capture that and make it a valuable part, but they do now. So it matters. Okay. There are 12 Democrats and 14 Republicans in true toss-up land in the House of Representatives going into this election. We're going to talk about that on the other side of the break, and we might even make it to the next hour on talking about this because it's a little murkier, kind of hard to see. I'm Cameron Smith. This is the Chris Hand Show on Super Talk 99.7.
Did you know you're overpaying for your health and wellness products?
With over 20 company-owned brands offering its members vitamins, supplements, wellness, and skincare products, you're able to save up to 70% off retail.
Members Nutrition can't change your life, but we can change the way you live.
All right, got a crash, and it is blocking the left lane of 24 westbound right there at Bell Road. And then you've got that road work, westbound South Loop, that is backing things up right there at I-65. In the news coming up, Hurricane Milton, Ethel Kennedy, inflation, and DACA dreamers learn their fate in court today. Coming up at 11 on Super Talk 99.7 WTN.
Time flies when you're having fun. I'm Cameron Smith. This is the Chris Hand Show. We don't have too much time before the break. But right now, the breakdown in the House of Representatives is 220 Republicans, 212 Democrats with 3 vacancies. Mike Gallagher resigned, Sheila Jackson Lee died, Bill Pascrell died. So we're going to look at where the races shake out on the other side of this break, because I don't want to get into it for a few seconds and then have to move along. But what I can say is that the House is truly up for grabs. This could go either direction, and I want you guys to be informed and know what you're talking about. So we'll dig into that a little bit on the other side here. I'm Cameron Smith. This is the Chris Hand Show, and you're listening to Super Talk 99.7.
Eleven o'clock on the dot this Thursday morning. I'm Ken Weaver with your top stories. We've got the full forecast in 5 minutes. Let's get right to Sherry Preston with the latest on Hurricane Milton.
And it barreled ashore on the west coast of Florida, plowed across the state, and made its way into the Atlantic. Hurricane Milton has now moved on. John Crosby is the police chief in Bradenton Beach, Florida.
We're seeing a lot of wind damage. Roofs have been compromised. We've had some structures that were compromised. They blew off the stilt.
Still, Florida Governor Ron DeSantis says the storm surge wasn't nearly as high as forecasters had predicted.
A lot of places in Pinellas County, they had negative storm surge because it sucked the water out of the bay. So in terms of all that, where you'd see the entire Tampa Bay area underwater, that did not happen.
President Biden monitoring the cleanup and FEMA's response.
The president is being continuously briefed. He's in contact with state and local officials, and he is pledging to stand by those impacted for as long as it takes to rescue, recover, and rebuild. His message this morning: we have your back.
ABC Chief White House Correspondent Mary Bruce.
RFK widow Ethel Kennedy has died in Massachusetts after being hospitalized following a stroke last week. She was 96. Jonathan Carl looks back on her life.
As a student at Manhattanville College in New York, she shared a room with Gene Kennedy. Ethel was 17 years old when she met Gene's brother Robert on a skiing vacation.
He was standing in front of an open fireplace, and I just turned around. I walked in the door and turned and saw him and thought, whoa.
Ethel and Robert married in a lavish ceremony 5 years later.
Inflation rising more than expected last month, dimming hopes for another big rate cut from the Fed. Here's Alexis Christoforous.
It raises the question about just how much the Fed's going to need to cut interest rates after reducing them by an aggressive 0.5% last month. Some analysts say the Fed may choose to pause at its November meeting and wait for more data before cutting rates again.
Inflation up 2.4% versus a year ago. Economists expected 2.3%. A major court case could decide what happens to more than 3.5 million dreamers in the U.S. They are the children of undocumented migrants brought to the U.S. as infants. Here's Andy Field.
Those dreamers have remained in the U.S. for years as courts debated their fate. Now Republican states are demanding the DACA program protecting them end and the children sent back to countries from where they arrived as infants. New Orleans' Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals will decide if it should overturn a lower court's decision saying those children should lose their protection. That case could land in the Supreme Court no matter what happens.
That's the latest news. Weather's next. I'm Ken Weaver, WTN News.
The guaranteed offer is the easiest way to sell your home. It's really simple. We bring you an all-cash offer. You close in as little as 21 days. No home inspections, no lock boxes, no open houses. Go to markspain.com to get a guaranteed offer and start packing.
We're in the last hour, folks, of the Chris Hand Show. I'm Cameron Smith, filling in for Chris, who is, again, perfectly fine, vacationing. He's going to come back rested, relaxed. I don't know. I mean, he may come. I don't see him coming back and changing his political views radically, but maybe Chris knows how to control the weather. I mean, it could get wild. Just saying. We've had a good show, a fun show. One of the things that we've been doing is talking politics, talking the races that matter most to Republican majorities in the House and Senate. Talks a little bit about political fundraising, why it matters. If you want to chime in on the conversation, 615-737-9986, the Members Nutrition Super Text line. As always, I love it when you guys engage, and you've done a fantastic job today. The House of Representatives, everybody's up every 2 years. Unlike the Senate, where you have these Senate classes where roughly a third of the Senate is up every 2 years. The entire House is up. It hinges right now, control of the House, whether you have a Speaker Johnson or a Speaker Jeffries, depends on, realistically, about 26 seats. And so I'll go over those. It doesn't mean that you're not going to have some surprises. You are. For example, in redistricting, the Alabama 2nd is a new seat. It is Figures v. Dobson, Democrat. It is a contested seat in a deep red state, but it's a likely Democratic win. It was drawn that way. And so there will be some like that where you know that it's looking like we're going to lose a couple. New York 22 is that way. It leans Democrat right now. Representative Williams holds that seat. So it looks like, at a minimum, Democrats should net 2, which puts them at 214, would put Republicans at 218, even if everybody else holds. That's not going to happen. My guess is that we are going to have a shakeup here. So let's look at the most competitive ones. So the ones that would be helpful if we could pick them up because they're in Republican states would be Washington 3. That is Perez is the incumbent there. It's an R+5. So that would be one that we want. Matt Cartwright in the Pennsylvania 8th. That's an R+4. Jared Golden in the Maine 2nd, R+6. Mary Peltola in Alaska, R+8. Definitely like to get those. What do we have that are true toss-ups, and where are the danger zones? California 22, David Valadao, that's a D+5. Looking down, Anthony DeEsposito, New York 04, that's a D+5. Mike Lawler, New York 17, D+3. What I'm telling you is how the district overall nets for Democrats or Republicans. So an R+5 or 6 is a good indicator. There's a good chance for the Republican candidate. A D+5 or 6 makes it really tough. But this is where the majorities are decided. And that's the hard part in all of this. 2666 says, don't forget about the rhinos. By your definition of a rhino, y'all can tell me what you think that is, but you know you need the rhinos, right? I know you don't like it, but my guess is you're going to like the Democrats less. And that's kind of how it is. And I understand that because I had talked in the Senate about Larry Hogan, former Republican governor of Maryland, running for Senate. He's supportive of abortion rights. He does not embrace Trump. So I understand why the folks that are listening to this radio station are going to say, well, that guy, Rhino, or whatever, we don't like him, bad. Fine. He's not running for office in Tennessee. You need those folks on the margin in order to win majorities. Do you guys know who in the Senate has stopped Democrats more than anybody else in the Senate, shut down a liberal agenda from happening? Anybody got a guess? The dyed-in-the-wool conservative that has really disrupted Biden's liberal agenda? Joe Manchin, an independent guy out of West Virginia. By any stretch of the imagination, he, Kyrsten Sinema, these are the folks that are making the difference in terms of how how policy gets made. It's on the margin. Do I think Blackburn's going to be successful in Tennessee? Absolutely. She can run far to the right and still win the general. But your governing majorities and your ability to actually stop things goes through folks that a lot of you would probably call rhinos. And I get it that may feel gross to say, oh, man, I couldn't imagine voting for Larry Hogan. Okay, cool. You don't have to. But, man, I would rather he wins than also Brooks, so I have a Republican to form a majority than a Democrat who will make it harder to do. And that's just the truth. And that's one of the things that I don't feel like Republicans have done a really good job of saying, hey, this is the last time we did this really well was probably Reagan in the Big Tent of you don't have to agree with us on everything, just enough. You're welcome. I think we should consider doing that again because I've seen it both ways. As a conservative who believes in limited government, free markets, individual responsibility, strong families, I want people in office who agree with me a lot. I think we all do. What I see in Trump that I haven't seen in a long time is somebody who didn't claim to be this dyed-in-the-wool conservative. He's not running out there and saying, I'm this hardliner on these principles, which drives me nuts sometimes. It does. Sometimes I'm like, why are we doing this? Why are we pushing this idea that's not particularly conservative? But what I think there is an opportunity to do here is broaden the tent and say, hey, folks, even if you agree with us on a couple of things, why don't you work with us for the sake of the country and sort of join arms and let's go. That's a good idea. It works. It's building coalitions you need to govern. Trump's challenge is his personality. That a lot of those folks that normally would look at, if you just look at the policies and you see a pretty moderate, like I said, 90s Democratic policy setup, a lot of people could go for that and say, oh, well, this is actually pretty reasonable. We like that a lot. But because of his personality, folks are like, well, he's dangerous. Democracy dies in darkness, all these other things. But really what they boil down to is we really hate that guy. And I think that's what they're hoping will work for them come November. I just don't think it will. Because a lot of folks have gotten over and just, you can say accepted it or just kind of figured it out that, hey, I'm not voting for a pastor. I'm voting for a politician that the most clearly aligns with what I value, even though not perfectly. And folks are willing to do that. And when you look at what we've had over the last 4 years, I don't really believe that Democrats can say that it's been super great. I don't believe that Afghanistan went well, because it didn't. That withdrawal was abysmal. And sure, Harris could just say, well, we were just following the game plan left by our predecessor. She's not going to say that. But it went very poorly. Things in Israel, not going great. It looks like maybe we avoid war with Iran. I don't know. How about Ukraine? It's an almost pregnant situation there with whether we're at war or not. Because I think when you look at the track record of the Biden-Harris administration, you look at the issues voters care about, the economy, foreign wars, immigration, it's not a close call to say, hey, this has gone well under Democrats. We just want to continue this. The answer should absolutely be, you had a shot and you blew it. And it is interesting to me because I was actually talking to a Democratic friend the other day. And he was telling me about how Harris is a good candidate. And I said, wait a minute. What are you talking about? You're telling me that Harris is a good candidate? What has she won? Well, attorney general in California, a senator. She wasn't a senator in California very long. And it's California. You're telling me that a statewide elected official in California is going to be a great candidate elsewhere in the country? And I've loved the reimagining of Harris. I've loved watching them position her as a moderate. I mean, this is just nuts. And that's one of the campaign failures of the Trump-Vance campaign, is I don't think we've done a good enough job branding Harris and Walz as wildly out there, of having a radical perspective on this stuff. And I'm not talking, you know me. You know I don't love hyperbole. I don't like conspiracy theories. I don't like the wackadoodle stuff. This is just, hey, look at her track record. The rank and file Democrats wouldn't even let her get started when they were actually voting for her. She just wasn't popular. So she gets tapped as vice president. Again, nobody has an opportunity to vote for her. And then there she is. She's not a great candidate. And I think that the game plan that they're running, and I said this in the first hour, that it's going to fall apart. It's not going to work and hold unless Trump does something completely wild, which it seems to me like he's been very disciplined lately. I think what you're going to see is Harris sort of throwing about, trying to figure out, how do I get several more percentage points in these swing states? And it's not going to work. What have we been talking about lately? We've been talking about her non-answers, about how the media is having to massage things to make them look better for her. You know what we haven't been talking about? Weird stuff Trump says. Seriously, it hasn't been there. We've talked about hurricanes and weird stuff Harris says. Her inability to answer even the most basic of questions. And if Trump can just chill out, I think he's in good shape. We'll talk about this a little bit more on the other side of the break. I'm Cameron Smith. This is the Chris Hand Show, and you're listening to Super Talk 99.7.
I still got that crash blocking the right shoulder, 24 westbound at Bell Road. And Hurricane Milton, the death toll up to 9. And we have just learned a tragic story after Hurricane Helene about how many people one family lost in that devastating flood. That's coming up at 11:30 on Super Talk 99.7 WTN.
Where are all my regulators? Not the FCC, the other kind. I'm Cameron Smith. This is the Chris Hand Show. We were just talking about the House race ratings, kind of where they are. Because there's so many of them up, I do think the House is too close to call. I think the Senate's in good shape. House is truly a toss-up of about 26 races. Some of the ones that lean Republican or lean Democrat may surprise us a little bit, but I would be reluctant to say which way the House is going to go. I feel much more confident that the Senate goes Republican than the House stays Republican. I'll put it that way, which I think is good. For me, I like the idea of I like the idea of a split government. I like the House and Senate being one party and the White House being another party. Why? Because I think as a federalist, the state should be the location of most government. So other than stuff that's so obviously an area where we should work together, I don't want the federal government doing everything. I think it's a huge, huge, huge problem. And as I mentioned earlier, I was pulling up a GAO report that they dropped in February on our fiscal health, and it is just abysmal. By 2050, I'm going to live that long in all likelihood. By 2050, 200% of GDP is what they're projecting. That's going to be our federal debt in terms of that debt to GDP ratio. The debt will be 200% of what the goods and services we produce in a year. Like, good grief, folks. Yikes. And I think that what most folks don't realize is how much our historical high of debt to GDP ratio was 106% in 1946 until COVID. And then, boom, went through the roof. And what's happening is we don't have a game plan for this. We have none. Nobody's talking about it. Nobody's figuring it out. And it's going to break us. Because I wish I could put this in a way that's simpler than this, but I can't. Democrats want to tax and spend. The problem is they're not willing to tax at rates that would keep up with our spending. Because they wouldn't get elected. We would freak out if they put the tax, they said, you know what? We think our government spending is just about right. We need to take enough taxes out of the economy to cover it. So we're going to do a massive tax hike. We would freak out and they would lose everywhere except for maybe California. They'd be gone. And then Republicans, on the other hand, decide they are borrow and spend. They borrow from the future and spend now. And just to be blunt, there's not enough conservatives in Washington who just don't want to do deficit spending to the tune of several $1 trillion a year. They're not there. Not their Republican, not their Democrat, not Trump, not Harris. No. You're looking at some folks like maybe Rand Paul, maybe Thomas Massey, maybe Chip Roy. Like, there's a handful of folks that say, hey, I'm not voting for a dime of deficit spending until you give me a plan to reduce the deficit and ultimately reduce the debt. They can't do that. And so that's where we find ourselves. And y'all tell me which is worse. Taxing and spending or borrowing and spending. Taxing takes it from us, so we get the benefit, we pay for it. Borrowing takes it from our kids, and we enjoy the benefits. I mean, that seems, to me, morally repugnant. I mean, the truth is, Democrats actually tax, borrow, and spend. Republicans borrow and spend. And I am all for, we have a spending problem. We do not have a tax problem. But we have to actually start to say no to things, push back on things. And when you look at the idea of pulling it back in, you got to pull it way back in, because Social Security, $1.35 trillion a year. That's what we're looking at. Healthcare, Medicare, Medicaid, $1.77 trillion. Other program spending, $2.35 trillion. So you've got actually over $3 trillion between healthcare spending and Social Security alone, against $4.44 trillion in revenue. Y'all can do the basic math and figure this out. Healthcare is Medicare, federal share of Medicaid, CHIP, which is Children's Health Insurance Program, health insurance exchanges, subsidies. And you can tell me you don't want to do that anymore. Okay, we can do that. We can radically cut it and change it. But good grief. Darren says, the Democrats borrow just as much as the Republicans. Don't try to put that on Republicans. Well, I know that that's not true, Darren. Because, yes, Democrats are voting for the spending, but they're also positioning tax hikes. They're pushing it out there. So by definition, Republicans are supporting more borrowing, unless they say, no, we support the tax hikes, and they wouldn't be in office for very long. I mean, this is monopoly money. 38112 said that. No intention of ever paying it off. Just keep recycling your debt. Somebody smart years ago asked me, well, why don't we just deflate it over time, because the time value of money, it should be a lot easier in the out years. Well, yeah, that's true if your debt instrument lasts for 30 years like a mortgage. These are short term. Governments that we borrow from, institutions, are wise to that, so that the debt revolves all the time. You know, it might be 6-month note, year note. The Treasury is always managing all of that, but don't kid yourself. And I'm not saying Democrats are good here. I'm simply saying that this Republican idea of fiscal conservatism, what's fiscally conservative about spending $1 trillion you don't have and making sure that your kids pay for it? That doesn't sound like a good deal to me. Maybe y'all disagree with that, but it's a huge, huge problem. And when we look at it, it becomes a problem when it becomes a problem. I know that's not the answer you want to hear, but basically what happens is you can't borrow anymore, and then you got to send taxes through the roof. We got to take a break. I'm Cameron Smith. This is the Chris Hand Show on Super Talk 99.7.
I'm Ken Weaver with your top stories. Got the full forecast coming up in 5 minutes. Hurricane Milton moving into the Atlantic after bringing ferocious winds, flooding, deadly tornadoes to Florida. At least 9 dead as rescuers dig through the damage. Over 80,000 people rode it out in shelters overnight. Officials say they'll better understand the extent of the damage as the day progresses, As for the focus right now, Governor Ron DeSantis
ensuring that fuel is flowing. Hopefully we get our gas stations and big box stores and everything open very quickly. I'd imagine that will likely happen, and just get people back on their feet.
Now, more than 3 million Floridians without electricity, with 635,000 accounts already restored. Meanwhile, residents and officials in western North Carolina and East Tennessee continue to recover bodies nearly 2 weeks after Hurricane Helene devastated the region. Fox News says the Craig family, which lives in an area known as Craig Town in Fairview, a suburb of Asheville, lost 11 members to a mudslide. The GoFundMe described the Craig family as pillars of the community. Money news, prices going up faster than economists expected last month, and it brings into question whether the Fed will cut the interest rate again. September inflation rose 2.4% year over year. Economists thought it'd be lower at 2.3%. One key takeaway, according to Bankrate, prices are still 21.4% more expensive since the 2020 recession began, with only about 6% of the nearly 400 items the Bureau of Labor Statistics tracks cheaper today. RFK widow Ethel Kennedy has died in Massachusetts after being hospitalized following a stroke last week. She was 96. Jonathan Carl looks back on her life.
Ethel was a devout Catholic and looked to her faith in heartbreak, including the death of her parents in a plane crash in 1955 and her brother in another crash 11 years later. Then in 1984 came the loss of her son David from an overdose, and again in 1997 when her son Michael died in a skiing accident. She also outlived 2 of her grandchildren and a great-grandson.
That's the latest news. Weather is next. I'm Ken Weaver, WTN News.
Did you know you're overpaying for your health and wellness products?
With over 20 company-owned brands offering its members vitamins, supplements, wellness, and skincare products, you're able to save up to 70% off retail.
Members Nutrition can't change your life, but we can change the way you live.
We're running out of time fast on the Chris Hand Show. I'm Cameron Smith. Rick from Nashville has been very patient talking about a split Congress. Rick, what's on your mind?
Hey, Chris, how are you? Well, in a way, I agree with you. Another way, I don't. I think in a kumbaya world, that works fine. But as you say, a lot of times you got to live in reality. And if the Democrats get the House, it's going to be nothing but impeachment after impeachment. It's going to be nothing but stumbling block after stumbling block. So in this case, I just don't think a split House and Senate is going to work, even if Trump gets elected, because we just won't get the things done that we need to get done.
Yeah, I agree with you, Rick. But, I mean, this all happens at the same time. And so what I'm concerned about is I don't know how the election's going to play out. I think Trump's got an inside track. But if he doesn't pull it off, then having just one of those is enough to slow down an agenda, as we've seen with the Biden administration. So that, to me, makes a lot of sense. You still think, hey, obviously Republicans would like to win everything, but I'm okay with it shutting down in Washington and not doing much. What do you think?
Well, when it's not what I want done, I am. But
I think that's honest.
I just feel like that the way the environment is right now, if everybody had the country's best interest in mind, I mean, it really wouldn't matter who got elected except for what they say they're going to do, and they tell the truth about what they're going to do, and
Sure.
we could all vote on that and count on it. But unfortunately, it's just not that way. And there's some on the Republican side too, but by and large, I'm more on the Republican views of how the country needs to be run. And, so I'm kind of really hoping for getting both of them this time.
All right. Well, I appreciate that, Rick. And I think Rick's, most Republicans feel that way. I'm simply saying, and I get it. I'm an old school dork. I sit here and I'm like, oh, I really don't want that much out of Washington. I want national defense, secure borders. There's just not a lot I want. I don't really want the federal government dictating education policy. I don't really want them spending like they're drunk. Provide for the national defense. I'd appreciate that. But the enumerated powers listed in the Constitution are pretty much what I want them limited to. I don't like this idea that anytime anyone anywhere does anything that involves the economy, well, the Commerce Clause lets Congress jump in and touch it. Gross. I don't want that. At all. Whatsoever. So a couple of y'all got a little feisty when I talked about what the spending is. You said, well, don't touch that Social Security. I paid into it. Man, have I got a story for you. It's gone. Yeah, you heard me right. Remember Al Gore's lockbox? Well, there's a lockbox for Social Security. Nope, there's not. That national debt you're hearing about includes intergovernmental transfers, which is a fancy way of saying all that money you paid into Social Security went into the general treasury, and they spent it. And they gave you in return an IOU that says, we're going to pay you. You don't worry about it. We got it. And that's what you have. You don't have money. There is the money is not sitting there. It is not, the money you've paid in is not growing interest. It's not invested. It's gone. And I am looking at the report from the trustees of the Social Security and Medicare trust funds. Listen to this. You're going to think I'm making this up, but this is from the report. The Old Age and Survivors Insurance Trust Fund, OASI, that's what we think about Social Security, will be able to pay 100% of total scheduled benefits until 2033. 2033. You're not mishearing me. At that time, the fund's reserves will become depleted. and continuing program income will be sufficient to pay 79% of scheduled benefits. Okay, so what's happening here is the money is coming in through your payroll taxes, right? That you see those on your taxes. That's coming in, and then it's going out the door. And in 2033, it will only be sufficient to pay 79% of the benefits. So imagine taking a 21% haircut to your Social Security payment because the federal government doesn't have the money to pay for it. Now, what they'll tell you is, oh, don't worry about that. We'll pay for it. We'll borrow and we'll pay for it. You know, we'll make sure that you're covered. You don't have to worry at all about that. Well, yeah, that's just one more thing the federal government has to pay for with money it doesn't have. I know this, I understand that this is a difficult pill to swallow, but you need to know that this is actually happening while you're on it. 4302 says senators are elected for 6 years. Every 2 years, 1/3 is up for election. Get your facts straight. That's exactly what I said on the air. The House is up. The entire House is up every 2 years. 1/3 of the Senate is up every 2 years. I don't know how that got confused, but thank you for the clarification. But this is where we are, folks. We're at a bad situation that's only getting worse, and everybody in the political class seems to be saying, don't worry about it. We'll win the next election. Okay, great. But if you don't, and we're still doing this, it's going to get ugly for some people. And what happens if we default? If we're not able to pay because we can't borrow? For a long time, this hasn't even been a real issue because the federal government was a safe place for money on the global stage, right? If you invested in the United States, no big deal. They'll pay you back. It's like clockwork. They know they're going to get paid back. When they don't, guess what? Interest rates go through the roof, just like your credit card. If you default, your penalty payments are 20-something%. Same here. Those interest rates go up, and then guess what? Your interest rates goes up on your credit card, on your auto loan, on your mortgage. And it is a hellish domino effect that would wreck America. I wish I had better news on a Thursday, but I don't. We got to take a break. We'll be right back. I'm Cameron Smith. This is the Chris Hand Show on Super Talk 99.7.
Hey, what's up, guys? It's Matt Murphy in the middle of downtown Franklin, Tennessee. We've talked so much about Savory Spice. I thought, why not show you the place? So let's go on in and see what's popping at Savory Spice. As I've always said, you will smell the spices even before you walk in. I can smell them right here in the doorway. Come on in, and let's introduce you to the one and only Holly, who is the owner and proprietor of Savory Spice. Say hey, Holly.
Hello, everyone.
Now, enough about Holly. Let's talk about spicy and easy products like the incredible taco soup, which, as I said, you put this in a crock pot, you put all the ingredients that it tells you to buy right there, you put the spices in, and it's so easy. So if you don't know what you're doing around the kitchen, it's a perfect way to find your way around the kitchen, as is the Mediterranean dill risotto. Now, for the holidays, pumpkin pie spice. What doesn't it have, Holly?
Pumpkin.
Doesn't have any pumpkin in it. That's a fun fact for all of you kids out there. Now, if you stop by Savory Spice, either in the Franklin location or at L&L Market, you can get yourself a sample of the dill dip, which is my absolute favorite. Just tell them Matt Murphy sent you to Savory Spice with purchase now. So come by Franklin or L&L Market in Nashville and come see Holly and the entire crew at Savory Spice.
So a couple of clarifications that we needed to make on the Chris Hand Show. That, yeah, if we default on the debt, the new interest rates, they will go through the roof. The current, if you have a fixed rate mortgage, you'll be fine until you pay off your house. But the other instruments, a default would be catastrophic in terms of what would happen to us after this. We have resident economist and all-around great guy, Matt Murphy, in to share in the misery. What I just read was from the Social Security and Medicare trustees report saying the trust fund will be able to pay 100% of total scheduled benefits until 2033, after which 79%. It's not very exciting.
Didn't I hear something like 20 years ago that Social Security was going to be insolvent by 2025?
I don't remember if it ever got to 2025.
I think it did.
Last year it was 2033. And so it's flat, and it's been kind of bumping around there. But
anyone depending on Social Security for their retirement, you're fools.
Yeah. There's not another way to play that.
I don't care how old you are.
Yeah.
At this point.
The government took your money.
It's a Ponzi scheme.
It is.
Where they take your money and they promise you that your money is your money and your money's not your money. And you know, you and I were debating whether or not Social Security accounts of whether it's socialism or fascism. Socialism implies, and I guess maybe this is my bias, it implies some sort of willing participation in a system. Like, for example, our water system, for most of us that are on city or community water, that's a socialist system.
Right.
We have decided as a community that we're all going to pay into a system and we're going to let another entity handle our water for us. And we expect to get good, clean water in our homes as a result of what we pay. That's a socialist way of distributing water. But that's voluntary. If I wanted to choose to dig a well and remove myself from the system, then I can do that. They won't let you do that with Social Security because it's a Ponzi scheme.
A lot of socialist regimes that it's not voluntary there either.
Well, they go into it voluntarily, and then they turn it into fascism, right? I mean, it becomes
so. Matt's making the point that our socialist system has now turned into fascism.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't disagree.
But that's I mean, my concern is imagine that my kids, that I've taught them well, and they come back to me and say, Dad, I don't think it's fair for me to pay into a system that I get nothing out of. So why should I have to pay for your Social Security benefits?
Mm-hmm.
And then they elect politicians who say, you probably shouldn't. And then all the money that everybody's been paying into this system, poof.
It's already. So I think it would be a better solution to do two things simultaneously. To give anyone under the age of, for example, 40 or 45, the opportunity to opt out of the Social Security system and accept the fact that they will receive no benefits for the monies already paid in, and simultaneously accept responsibility for monetary payouts, even if it has to come out of the government treasury. For all of those, you have to end the system, find a split, and say everybody above this age, we're gonna take care of you, even if it's not financially solvent because of all of these people leaving the system.
Right.
But we're not doing this anymore like this.
And you want to talk about scaring people to death?
Freak them out.
This is what Democrats have long attacked Republicans by saying, look, they want to privatize. Democrats don't have any game plan to make this thing solvent or work. They're just like, if you touch it, you're going to die.
Well, I mean, they have the game plan that they believe that eventually the system will get so broken and it will crumble and it will be so destroyed that most of America will agree to tax the rich people.
Yeah.
More.
Confiscatory rates.
Right, in order to make it whole again, or just add more money to the national debt that nobody wants to.
So what do you have coming up for us this year?
Well, we're going to continue to talk about Hurricane Helene and the aftermath of Helene. We're going to talk about Milton, obviously. And then Kamala Harris has not had a very good week. And the entire construct of this misinformation argument is designed to try to turn natural disasters against Donald Trump, because that's the only way that they believe that they can take political advantage of what's been going on over the past couple of days. So I'm going to walk through all of that.
That sounds good. Well, I'm telling you, folks, it's looking better and better for Trump. It's looking worse and worse for Harris. And the betting markets reflect that. all the other polling. I mean, everything's going in Trump's direction right now. And Harris, she's out there floundering, and I think there's a reason why.
Because there's nothing upstairs, baby. There's no there, and we now know that.
I would like to nervous laugh now. Oh, wow. That's where we have to call it, folks. I'm Cameron Smith. This has been the Chris Hand Show. Matt Murphy's up next, and this is Super Talk 99.7.